She was worth $4.3 billion, and she was standing on a stranger's porch, in the rain, knocking on a door she had never knocked on before, with a folded piece of paper in her hand, and a feeling in her chest she hadn't felt since she was 9 years old. Fear. He was inside that house, a man she had never met, a man who had no idea who she was, a man who had spent the last 3 years of his life just trying to make sure his daughter had breakfast in the morning. Two people, completely different worlds, about to collide in a way neither of them would ever be able to explain. And it all started with a name written on a piece of paper, and the words, "Go see him. He's the only one who can help you. Welcome to Crest Stories." His name was Callum Reeves, and if you passed him on the street, you wouldn't look twice. That was actually something he had gotten used to. Being overlooked, being underestimated, being the guy that nobody quite saw, until they needed something fixed. Callum was 37 years old. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on the edge of Pembroke, a small town in central Ohio that most people only knew because of the interstate that ran through it. The kind of town where everybody knew your business, but somehow still managed to act surprised when they heard it from someone else. He had moved to Pembroke 3 years ago, after everything fell apart. After his wife, Lauren, sat across from him at their kitchen table in Cincinnati, slid her wedding ring across the surface, and said the words he had replayed in his mind every single night since. "Callum, I can't do this anymore." She hadn't left because he was a bad man. She had left because she had fallen in love with someone else, and she had the decency, or the cruelty, depending on the day, to be honest about it. What she had not been as honest about was that her leaving would mean leaving their daughter too. Petra, 6 years old at the time, now 9. Big brown eyes that asked questions her mouth hadn't learned to put into words yet. A laugh that could cut right through the worst kind of silence. And a habit of falling asleep in the car every single time they drove anywhere longer than 15 minutes. Even if she had just woken up. Callum raised Petra alone. Not because he had to, but because Lauren had chosen a life that didn't include either of them. She sent birthday cards. She called on holidays. She had remarried 18 months later. And she had a new baby now. A new beginning. While Callum just continued. He worked as a freelance structural analyst, which meant that people paid him to look at buildings, bridges, and infrastructure projects and tell them what was wrong before something went wrong. He wasn't famous for it. He didn't have a big company or a fancy office with his name on the glass door. He worked from a corner of his kitchen table, with a second monitor propped up on a stack of old engineering textbooks, and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Dad" that Petra had given him for Father's Day, which he used every single morning without exception. His life was quiet, contained, and on most days, he was okay with that. On most days. On a Tuesday evening in late October, Callum was sitting at that kitchen table reviewing load calculations for a small bridge project in rural Kentucky. Petra was in the next room doing homework, or pretending to do homework while actually watching videos on her tablet, which Callum knew, but chose his battles carefully. The rain had started around 5 o'clock. By 7, it was the kind of rain that makes the whole world feel smaller. The kind that turns your house into a cocoon and everything outside into something distant and muffled. Callum had a bowl of pasta on one side of his laptop and a half-eaten granola bar on the other. Because dinner, when you are a single father working on a deadline, is whatever is closest to the keyboard. As he heard the knock at 8:47, he knew the time because he had just looked at the clock in the corner of his screen to calculate how much longer until he absolutely had to get Petra to bed. The knock was firm, not aggressive, but not hesitant either. The knock of someone who had made a decision and was committed to it. Callum frowned at his screen for a moment, because he was not expecting anyone. He never expected anyone. He pushed back from the table, walked through the small living room, stepping over Petra's backpack, which she had left exactly in the center of the floor as if it were a decorative feature, and opened the front door. And he just stood there. She was soaking wet. Her dark hair was plastered against her cheeks. Her coat, which even Callum could tell was the kind of coat that cost more than his car, was dark with rain. She was wearing heels that were completely impractical for a rainy Tuesday in Pembroke, Ohio. And she was holding a piece of folded paper against her chest like it was the most important thing she owned. She was stunning. Not in the way that made you feel comfortable about it. In the way that made you blink. The way that made you feel like you were standing in front of something you didn't quite have the right context for. Her name was Serena Aldridge, but Callum didn't know that yet. All he knew was that there was a woman at his door in the rain who looked like she belonged in a different zip code, a different state, a different tax bracket, a different reality. "Can I help you?" he said. She looked at him. Not the way strangers look at strangers. The way people look at someone they have been told about. Like she was checking him against a description. "Are you Callum Reeves?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were something else entirely. There was a tension behind them that she was doing everything in her power to keep from the surface. The way someone looks when they have been holding something heavy for a very long time, and they are starting to wonder how much longer they can carry it. "Yeah," Callum said slowly. "That's me." She exhaled, just slightly, like she had been holding her breath since she got in the car. "I was told to see you," she said. Callum stared at her. The rain hammered the porch roof. A car passed on the street behind her, on its headlights sweeping across the front of the house. "By who?" he asked. She hesitated. And in that hesitation, there was a whole story. "By my father," she said. "Right before he died." Music drops. He stepped back from the door. Not because he fully understood what was happening, but because whatever it was, she clearly needed to not be standing in the rain while she explained it. "Come in," he said. She stepped inside and he closed the door behind her. The quiet of the house settled around them both. Petra appeared in the doorway of the hallway, wearing her pajamas, the ones with the little green frogs on them, her hair in two uneven pigtails that Callum had attempted that morning. She looked at the soaking wet woman standing in her living room the way 9-year-olds look at unexpected things, with complete, unfiltered fascination. "Who's that?" Petra asked. "A visitor," Callum said. "She's wet," Petra observed. "Yes, she is. Did she fall in a puddle?" The woman looked at Petra, and something happened in her expression that Callum couldn't quite read. Something that moved through her face like a wave, and then was gone, replaced by something that almost looked like a smile. "Something like that," the woman said softly. "Petra," Callum said, "go get me a towel from the bathroom closet. The big ones." Petra disappeared down the hall with the kind of enthusiasm that children only have when they feel like they are being included in something important. Callum looked at the woman. "You want to sit down?" he asked. She looked around the living room. at the mismatched furniture and the stack of library books on the coffee table, at Petra's drawings taped to the wall by the television, at the single lamp casting its warm yellow light over all of it. And she nodded. She sat on the edge of the couch, not leaning back, the way people sit when they're not sure how long they're staying. Petra returned with a large blue towel, held it out with both hands like she was presenting a gift. The woman took it and thanked her in a way that was genuine enough that Petra beamed. Petra was a very good judge of genuine. "Okay," Callum said, settling into the chair across from her. "Start from the beginning." She looked at him. "My name is Serena Aldridge," she said. Callum kept his face neutral, but he recognized the name. Of course he did. Aldridge Capital, one of the largest private equity firms on the East Coast. He had read about the founder's death, Warren Aldridge, 3 weeks ago. A brief article in the financial section he scrolled past on his phone while waiting in line at the grocery store. A billionaire. A titan. A man who had built an empire from nothing. "Warren Aldridge was your father," Callum said. "Yes," she said. "I'm sorry for your loss." She nodded once. The way people nod when they've heard that phrase so many times in recent weeks that it has lost its edges. "He left me a letter," she said, "along with his will." She looked down at the folded paper still in her hand. "In the letter, he told me there were things about our family, about the company, about me, that he had kept hidden for a very long time." She paused. The rain outside continued its steady rhythm against the windows. "He said that before he could explain it all properly, before I could understand any of it, there was one person I needed to find first." She looked up at Callum. "You," she said. Callum sat very still, the kind of still that is actually the opposite of stillness, the kind that is a body working very hard not to show what is happening inside it. "I've never met your father," he said. "I don't think I've ever been in the same room as the man." "I know," she said. "Then why?" "Because of what you do." She opened the folded paper carefully. Her hands were steady, but her knuckles were white. She cleared her throat. He wrote, "Serena, by the time you read this, I will have already made peace with what I'm about to tell you. But you deserve the full truth, not the version I spent 30 years curating. Find a man named Callum Reeves in Pembroke, Ohio. He analyzed the Hartwell overpass 4 years ago. His report was buried. What he found matters. It changes everything. Not just for us, for the people who trusted us. Start with him. The rest will follow." Callum stared at her. The Hartwell overpass. He hadn't heard that name in 4 years. He had tried not to hear it. He stood up slowly from his chair, walked to the kitchen, came back with 2 mugs of coffee he hadn't offered but that she clearly needed, set one in front of her, and sat back down. "The Hartwell overpass," he said quietly. "That was a long time ago." "Tell me about it," she said. Not a request, not a demand either. More like someone who has been in the dark for too long and has finally found a door. And they are asking the person on the other side to please open it. Callum wrapped both hands around his mug, looked at the surface of the coffee. 4 years ago, he said, I was contracted by a firm called Meridian Infrastructure Group to do an independent structural assessment of the Hartwell Overpass in western Pennsylvania. Aldridge Capital financed that project, she said. Yes, he said. I know. What did you find? Callum exhaled. I found that the overpass had significant structural compromise in 3 of its primary load-bearing joints. Fatigue cracking that was consistent with poor quality materials. The kind of deviation from spec that doesn't happen by accident. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means someone swapped out the grade of steel that was supposed to be used and used something cheaper. The difference in cost per project of that size could be significant." "How significant?" "Millions, depending on how many projects the same thing was done on." She went very still. "I submitted my report," Callum continued. "Flagged the safety issues, recommended immediate remediation and a full audit of material procurement across all Meridian projects." "And then what happened?" she asked. "And then nothing," Callum said. "I never heard back. My contract was terminated 2 weeks later. The company said the project was being reassessed internally. I tried to follow up 3 more times. Nobody returned my calls." "And the overpass?" she asked. Callum looked at her. "It's still there," he said. "Open, in use, if every day." The air between them went very heavy. "My father knew," she said. It wasn't a question. Callum said nothing, because he didn't know what Warren Aldridge had known, but he had always wondered. He had always, in the back of the part of his mind that never quite let things go, wondered who had made his report disappear. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "do you still have it?" He looked at her. "The report?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she leaned forward slightly, long enough that the rain outside seemed to get louder. "Yeah," he said finally. "I kept a copy. Let me tell you something about what it costs a man to keep a report like that." Callum hadn't kept it because he thought he'd ever use it. He had kept it the way people keep certain things they can't bring themselves to throw away. A letter you never sent. A photograph from a day that ended badly. A piece of evidence of a time when you tried to do the right thing and were quietly, efficiently, stopped. After Meridian had dropped him, he'd lost 2 more contracts in the following year. Not dramatic losses, not firings or confrontations, just opportunities that dried up, calls that stopped coming, a network that suddenly went quiet. He hadn't been able to prove it was connected. He still couldn't. But a man who spends his career reading structural stress patterns learns to recognize when pressure is being applied, even when it's invisible. He had moved to Pembroke partly because the work was there, and partly because Cincinnati had started to feel like a place where something was pressing down on him from every angle, and partly because Petra needed stability, and he needed to be the kind of father who could give it to her, even if everything else felt like it was being slowly, quietly dismantled. He hadn't told anyone about the Hartwell report. Not his parents, not his ex-wife, not the few friends he still called occasionally. Because what would he say? "I found something that mattered and it got buried, and I don't know who buried it, and I can't prove anything, and I'm not even sure anyone would care." He had just kept living, kept working, kept making breakfast for Petra, kept packing her lunch, kept going to her school plays and her soccer games and her parent-teacher conferences, and kept being the one constant thing in her life, because she deserved that. She deserved someone who showed up. And now, in his living room, on a rainy Tuesday in October, a woman worth $4 billion was sitting on his couch, with a letter from her dead father, and she was asking him to unbury something he had spent 4 years trying to make peace with leaving buried. "Can I ask you something?" Callum said. "Of course," Serena said. "Why does it matter now? Your father is gone. Aldridge Capital is yours. You have the resources to handle whatever this is without me." She set her coffee mug down carefully. "Because I found something else," she said. "In my father's files. In the private ones that his assistant gave me after the funeral. There are records going back 15 years, Mr. Reeves. Meridian wasn't the only project." Callum went still. "How many?" he said. She looked at him, and her eyes were the eyes of someone who has just learned something that changes the shape of everything they thought they understood. 17, she said. 17 projects across 6 states, all financed through Aldridge Capital, all using Meridian as the primary contractor, all with the same material substitution pattern. Callum stared at her. "Are any of them—" he started. "High traffic?" she finished. "Yes, 3 interstate bridges, a pedestrian overpass, a public parking structure, a stadium renovation." The silence that followed was the kind that isn't really silence at all. It's the sound of 2 people absorbing the weight of what has just been said. "People use these structures every day," Callum said. "Yes," she said. "If even one of them—" "I know," she said. Her voice cracked slightly on the second word, just slightly, but Callum heard it. "Why are you here, Serena?" he said. Not coldly, quietly. The way you say something when you need the real answer and not the prepared one. She looked at her hands for a moment, then looked up. "Because my father sent me to you," she said. "Which means he trusted you. Which means he knew you were one of the few people in this whole chain who actually tried to do the right thing. And paid for it. And I need someone I can trust." "You don't know me," Callum said. "No," she said, "but my father did, and he left me very little else to go on." Callum looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up. "Wait here," he said. He walked down the hall, past Petra's room, eyes where the light was off now. He checked on her briefly. She was asleep. Her small face relaxed and peaceful. Her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm the way it always was. He stood there for a moment in the doorway, looking at her, thinking about bridges, thinking about the families who drove across them every day without thinking twice, thinking about what it means to let something stay buried when the burial itself is the danger. He walked to his office, which was really just a small second bedroom he used as a workspace, opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, and pulled out a manila envelope that hadn't been touched in 4 years. He came back to the living room, set the envelope on the coffee table between them. "This is everything," he said. "All of it? Every measurement, every photograph, every deviation from specification I documented, and a list of every person I tried to contact afterward who never called me back." Serena looked at the envelope, then looked at him. "If we move forward with this," she said carefully, "it won't be quiet. Meridian has lawyers. My father's estate has lawyers. There are people with a great deal to lose." "I know," Callum said. "You have a daughter," she said. "Not as a threat, as an acknowledgement." "I know that too," he said. "So why are you handing me that envelope?" she asked. Callum sat down, picked up his coffee mug, looked at the world's okayest dad text on the side of it. "Because she uses bridges too," he said. "Now, before we go any further, there are things about Serena Aldridge that you need to understand. Aki, because the woman sitting in Callum's living room that night was not simply a grieving daughter on a fact-finding mission. She was a woman carrying something of her own. Something she had not told Callum. Something she wasn't sure she was going to tell him. Serena was 34 years old. She had taken over as acting CEO of Aldridge Capital 3 weeks ago. The day after her father's funeral, because that was what Warren Aldridge had specified in his succession plan. And because Serena, who had spent the last 6 years working inside the company, learning every level of it, was the only person Warren had fully trusted with it. That trust had felt like a gift her whole life. Now it felt like a test she wasn't sure she could pass. Because what Serena had found in her father's private files was not just evidence of structural fraud. It was evidence that her father had known about it. Not from the beginning. She didn't believe that. She couldn't believe that. But at some point, someone had shown Warren Aldridge what was happening on the Meridian projects. And Warren Aldridge had made a choice. She didn't know yet what that choice had been. Whether he had tried to stop it and been overruled. Whether he had been threatened. Whether he had convinced himself the risk was manageable. The way powerful men sometimes convince themselves that the thing they are doing is not as bad as the thing it actually is. She didn't know. And that not knowing was eating her alive. Because she had loved her father, admired him, built her entire understanding of what it meant to be a person of integrity on the foundation he had laid. And now that foundation had cracks in it. And she was an expert, apparently, at spotting cracks that other people had missed. She had also not told Callum about the letter she had received 6 days ago. The one that wasn't from her father. The one that had no return address. The one that contained a single typed sentence. Miss Aldridge, your father made a mistake reaching out. Consider carefully before you do the same. She had gone to the police. They had taken a report. They had told her it was likely a disgruntled former employee and that she should call if anything escalated. She had then hired a private security firm. She had then driven to Pembroke, Ohio, by herself. Because she didn't want anyone to know where she was going. And because she needed to know that the first conversation about this happened without witnesses. She was scared. She was also furious. And Serena Aldridge had learned a long time ago that when those two things exist in her simultaneously, she becomes very, very focused. She looked at the manila envelope on Callum's coffee table. Then she looked at Callum. He was watching her the way she had noticed he watched things. Carefully, without rushing. The way an engineer looks at a structure when they're trying to understand it. There's something else you should know, she said. I was wondering when that was coming, he said. She blinked. What do you mean? You've been deciding whether to tell me something since you sat down, he said. The way you keep stopping mid-thought and redirecting. She looked at him steadily. Oh, you're perceptive, she said. Occupational habit, he said. Tell me. She told him about the letter. Callum listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. When did you receive it? He asked. 6 days ago? And you drove here alone tonight? Yes. He looked at her with an expression that was not quite disapproval and not quite admiration, and sat somewhere between the two. That was either very brave or very unwise, he said. Possibly both, she said. I've been told I trend that direction. Does anyone know you're here? My assistant knows I'm in Ohio, that's it. Callum nodded slowly. He stood up, walked to the front window and looked out at the rain-soaked street. His street was quiet. It was always quiet. He checked it anyway. Okay, he said, turning back. Here's what I think. I'm listening, she said. I think your father spent the last few years of his life trying to figure out how to undo something that may have started without his knowledge and became impossible to stop without collapsing everything he built. I think he found my report because he went looking for it. I think he buried it 4 years ago because someone pressured him to. And I think the letter he left you is his attempt to make it right, without being able to be here to do it himself. Serena absorbed this. And the threatening letter, she said, means there is still someone with enough to lose that they're watching closely. So what do we do? She asked. Callum turned from the window. We verify everything first, he said. Before we take this to anyone, I need to see your father's files. I need to cross-reference them against my original assessment. If the pattern holds across all 17 projects, then we build a case that can't be dismissed. And then? And then we hand it to the right people, he said. People who can actually do something with it. You make it sound straightforward, she said. It's not, he said. But complicated isn't the same as impossible. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly. More like the feeling of finding solid ground after a very long time of uncertain footing. My father was right about you, she said quietly. He didn't know me, Callum said. No, she said. But he knew your work, and apparently that was enough. If you're finding this story as gripping as we think you are, do us a small favor and hit that like button right now. It helps Crest Stories reach more people who love a good story told well. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? The best part is still coming. Let's get back to Callum and Serena. She stayed that night. Not in the way you might be thinking. She stayed because the rain had turned into something closer to a storm by 11 o'clock. And because there was no reasonable hotel within 25 miles of Pembroke that Serena Aldridge would feel safe in on a night when she had already received one threatening letter and driven 3 hours alone to a stranger's house. And because Callum had a guest room, which he had been using primarily as storage for boxes he hadn't finished unpacking since the move 3 years ago, but which contained a bed that was made and a door that locked. He had offered it without making it awkward. She had accepted it without making it complicated. They were both people who understood the value of being practical. In the morning, Petra had found Serena in the kitchen, attempting with limited success to operate Callum's percolator. It has a quirk, Petra announced, appearing in her frog pajamas with the authority of someone who had been watching adults fail at this exact task for 3 years. You have to hold the top button down for 5 seconds before you press the other one. Thank you, Serena said. Petra demonstrated. The machine rumbled to life. I'm Petra, Petra said. I know, Serena said. Your dad told me your name last night. I'm Serena. That's a pretty name, Petra said, and with the direct sincerity of a child who hasn't yet learned to dilute compliments. So is yours, Serena said. Callum came downstairs 10 minutes later, found his daughter and the billionaire sitting across from each other at the kitchen table. Petra explaining to Serena with great seriousness the plot of a book she was reading about a girl who discovers she can talk to horses, and Serena listening with what appeared to be genuine interest. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. Then he made eggs, because it was a Wednesday morning and Petra needed breakfast. And apparently they had work to do. Over the next 5 days, Callum's kitchen table became a different kind of workspace. Serena's assistant, a sharp and unflappable young man named Porter, I drove down from Columbus with 3 encrypted hard drives containing Warren Aldridge's private files. Callum connected his second monitor, and they began. The Hartwell report had been the thread. The files were the fabric. What they found was meticulous. Warren Aldridge had been whatever else he was, an extraordinary record keeper. There were emails going back 11 years between Warren and a man named Franklin Holt, who had been the COO of Meridian Infrastructure Group, in which Holt had first proposed the material substitution program as a cost-efficiency initiative. And Warren had initially pushed back. Hard. The early emails were sharp and clear. Franklin, This is not something I will be associated with. The specifications exist for a reason. Find another way. But then, the emails changed. Slowly. Over about 18 months. Holt's arguments became more elaborate, more insistent. References to competitor firms doing the same thing. References to the fact that the deviations were within acceptable variance. References to pressure from other board members. References to what it would mean for the firm's returns if Meridian's contracts fell through. And then there was an email that Serena read 3 times before she said anything. It was from Warren to Holt, dated 6 years ago. It said, "Fine, but this ends here. No new projects. Clean up the existing ones as contracts allow. And if this ever comes to light, I will not be the one holding the bag, Franklin. Be very clear on that." Serena set down the printout. Callum looked at her. "He knew," she said. "Like he also tried to stop it initially," Callum said carefully. "And then he let it continue," she said. Her voice was very flat, very controlled. "For 6 years." Callum didn't argue with that, because it was true. "He sent me to you," she said after a long moment. "He spent the last weeks of his life writing that letter. He tried to fix it." "I know," Callum said. "It doesn't undo it." "No," Callum said. "It doesn't." She stood up from the table, walked to the window, looked out at Petra, who was in the backyard kicking a soccer ball against the fence with the determined repetition of a kid who has set herself a private goal. "When I was 8 years old," Serena said, "my father took me to see the Golden Gate Bridge. I remember standing there looking at it thinking, someone built this. Some person sat down and figured out how to make that. He told me that the most important thing about a structure isn't what it looks like," she continued. "It's what it can bear. He said the most beautiful bridges in the world are beautiful because they're strong, that the aesthetics are a product of the integrity." She turned from the window. "He believed that," she said. "I know he believed it, which means somewhere along the way, he stopped applying it to himself." Callum looked at her. "People do that," he said quietly. "It's one of the most consistent things I've observed in this work. The closer you are to a structure, the harder it is to see its weaknesses objectively." She held his gaze. "Is that what happened to you?" she said. "With your marriage?" He blinked. It was the first personal thing she had asked him. Direct, clean, not apologetic about it. "Probably," he said. "In hindsight." She nodded. "I ask because I want to know who you are," she said. "Not just what you found. I need to understand who I'm trusting with this." Fair enough, Callum thought. "I miss things," he said. "I was so focused on keeping the work going and keeping Petra stable that I stopped looking at what was happening in my own house. By the time I saw it clearly, my wife had already made her decision." "And you haven't been angry at her?" Serena asked. "I've been angry at her," he said. "I'm not anymore. Anger's expensive." She looked at him. "That's either wisdom or denial," she said. "Little of both, probably," he said. And for the first time since she had knocked on his door, she laughed. A real laugh. Brief and surprised, like it caught her off guard. Callum found himself smiling. "Okay," she said, coming back to the table. "Let's keep going." On day 4, Porter knocked on the kitchen door frame and said, "Ms. Aldridge, we have a problem." Serena and Callum both looked up from the table. Porter's expression was carefully composed in a way that suggested the problem was not a small one. "Someone filed an emergency injunction this morning," Porter said. "In federal court, attempting to freeze access to Mr. Aldridge's private files pending a dispute over ownership of certain documents classified as proprietary business records." Serena was on her feet before Porter finished the sentence. Who filed it? Porter said the name quietly. Serena's jaw tightened. She turned to Callum. It was filed by Meridian Infrastructure Group, she said. Callum sat back. They know we have the files, he said. They know we have something, she said. But how? They both looked at Porter. Porter's expression remained composed, but something moved behind his eyes. I don't know, he said. I drove here directly. I haven't communicated with anyone about the contents of the drives. We have a leak somewhere, Serena said. It was not a pleasant thought. A leak meant someone close enough to know what they were doing. Close enough to move fast enough to file an injunction within 4 days. Callum stood up, walked to the window, checked the street. Quiet. 2 cars he recognized. Nothing unusual. The injunction, he said, turning back. Will it hold? My lawyers say no, she said. Personal correspondence left to me by my father is not proprietary business records. They're overreaching, but it will take time to contest, and time gives them room to maneuver, Callum finished. Yes. Then we move faster, he said. Callum, she said, if we present what we have before it's fully verified. We don't present it, he said. Not yet, but we get it to someone who can hold it safely, someone outside the reach of a Meridian attorney. Who? She said. Callum thought for a moment. There was a name in the back of his mind. Someone he had met years ago at a professional conference in Pittsburgh. A structural safety advocate who now worked with a federal oversight organization called the National Infrastructure Integrity Board. A woman named Dr. Patricia Weld, who had the kind of reputation that couldn't be bought and the kind of temperament that didn't intimidate easily. He had her contact information somewhere. He was almost certain he did. Give me an hour, he said. He went to his office, dug through his contacts, found Patricia Weld's number in an old notebook from a conference 7 years ago. Dialed it. It rang 4 times. Then, Weld. Dr. Weld. My name is Callum Reeves. We met at the Pittsburgh Infrastructure Symposium in 2018. I had a report on the Allegheny Crossing. A pause. Reeves, she said. I remember. You found the fatigue stress nobody wanted to find. That's me, he said. I need to talk to you, today, if possible. It's about something bigger. Another pause. Longer. How much bigger? She said. 17 projects, he said. 6 states. 15 years. The silence on the other end of the phone had weight to it. I'll clear my afternoon, Patricia Weld said. The next 72 hours were the kind that age a person. Dr. Patricia Weld arrived in Pembroke the following morning. She was in her late 50s, small and silver-haired and precise in the way that came from spending 30 years in rooms where imprecision cost lives. She looked at the materials spread across Callum's kitchen table. She asked questions that were sharp and specific and moved quickly from point to point the way a surgeon moves through tissue. Efficient, exact, unsparing. By noon, she had confirmed what Callum and Serena had suspected. The pattern was real, consistent, documented. Across all 17 projects, the same deviation in steel grade. The same supplier records concealed beneath legitimate procurement paperwork. The same initials on the approval documents. F.H. Franklin Holt. This needs to go to the Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General, Dr. Weld said, removing her glasses and setting them on the table. And the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Today. The Meridian injunction, Serena started. Won't apply to a federal criminal referral, Weld said. And frankly, If they think that injunction is going to slow this down, they have fundamentally misread the room. She looked at both of them. I want to be direct with you about what this means, she said. Once this is filed, it cannot be unfiled. There will be investigations. There will be media attention. Aldridge Capital will be scrutinized. Deeply. There will be lawsuits. There will likely be criminal charges for Holt and anyone else who can be tied directly to the approvals. And it will take years to fully resolve. Serena looked at her steadily. And the structures, she said. They will be assessed immediately, Weld said. That's the first thing that happens. Public safety takes precedence over everything. Then we do it, Serena said. No hesitation, no qualification, just those 4 words. Callum looked at her and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. The particular quiet that comes when you are watching someone make a decision they know is going to cost them, and they make it anyway. Your company, he said. The investigation will... I know, she said. Aldridge Capital's reputation. Callum, she said. She met his eyes. There are bridges that people drive their children across every day. I'm not going to trade that for a quarterly return. The referral was filed on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday evening, the first news cycle had picked it up. By Saturday morning, Franklin Holt had retained 3 separate law firms. By Monday, 2 of the 17 flagged structures had been closed for emergency inspection. By the end of the following week, the Hartwell Overpass, the same one Callum had flagged 4 years ago in a report that had been buried, was closed. Inspectors found exactly what Callum had documented. Exactly. Down to the specific joints, down to the specific grade deviation. Nobody had died because of the Hartwell Overpass. Not yet. But the engineers who walked its structure that week said it had been moving in that direction with patient, invisible certainty. And that was the thing about structural failure. It didn't announce itself. It accumulated quietly. And then one day, it didn't. The media coverage was extensive. Aldridge Capital was at the center of it. Serena's name was everywhere. She handled it the way she handled everything. Directly. She held a press conference 10 days after the referral was filed. She stood at a podium with no notes. And she said, "My father built this company with the belief that integrity and performance were not in conflict. Based on what we now know, certain decisions were made within projects financed by Aldridge Capital that violated that belief. I am deeply sorry for the breach of public trust that these decisions represent. I am cooperating fully with federal investigators, and I am committing today, publicly and permanently, to an independent structural oversight review of every infrastructure project ever financed by this firm, going back 20 years. She was asked if she felt responsible for her father's choices. She said, "I feel responsible for what happens next. That's the only part I can control." She was asked who had helped bring this forward. She paused. "A structural analyst in Ohio," she said, "named Callum Reeves, who tried to do the right thing 4 years ago and was pushed aside for it. He deserves the credit." Callum watched the press conference from his kitchen, with Petra sitting on the counter beside him eating an apple. As because Petra climbed on every surface available and had given up pretending otherwise. "That's the lady who stayed in our guest room," Petra said. "Yeah," Callum said. "She said your name on TV," Petra said. "Yeah." Petra considered this with the gravity of someone processing new and significant information. "Is she famous?" Petra asked. "She's getting there," Callum said. "Is she your girlfriend?" Petra asked. Callum looked at his daughter. "Where did that come from?" You smiled weird when she was leaving last time, Petra said. You don't smile like that at normal people. Callum opened his mouth, closed it, took a sip of coffee. Mind your business, he said. Petra grinned and took a large bite of apple. 3 weeks after the press conference, on a Saturday afternoon in late November, when there was a knock at Callum's door. Not frantic this time, not urgent. A calm, deliberate knock. He opened the door. Serena stood on his porch. No rain this time. The afternoon light was thin and cool. She was wearing a coat that was still expensive but considerably more practical than the last one. And she was carrying a paper bag that smelled like it was from the good Italian place in Columbus he didn't know how she knew about. I brought food, she said. I can smell that, he said. I was in the area, she said. He looked at her. Pembroke was not on the way to anything from anywhere. You were not in the area, he said. No, she agreed. I was not. She looked at him steadily. The composure she always carried was there. But underneath it was something softer. Something that had been quietly making its way to the surface over the past several weeks. Something she had probably tried to talk herself out of several times on the 3-hour drive down. Can I come in? She said. Petra's home, he said. I know. I brought enough food for 3. He looked at her for a moment longer. The thin November light, the paper bag, the look on her face that was trying very hard to be casual and not quite managing it. He stepped back from the door. You're going to have to explain to her why you didn't bring anything for the rabbit, he said. Serena blinked. The stuffed one? No, the actual one, Callum said. We got an actual rabbit 3 weeks ago because a certain 9-year-old is very persuasive. She stared at him. You got a rabbit? His name is apparently Spaghetti, Callum said. Don't ask me. She laughed. That real laugh. The one that surprised her. She walked inside. The door closed behind her, and in the kitchen, Petra heard it, slid off her chair, and came running. 6 months later, the federal investigation into Meridian Infrastructure Group was ongoing. Franklin Holt had entered into plea negotiations. 4 of the 17 flagged structures had undergone full remediation. The remaining 13 were in various stages of inspection and repair. Nobody had been hurt. That mattered enormously. Callum's phone had started ringing again. New contracts. Better ones than before. From firms that had read the coverage and wanted the kind of analyst who would tell them the truth even when the truth was inconvenient. He had also been asked to serve on the advisory committee to Dr. Weld's oversight organization. He had said yes. He had also been taking a drive down to Columbus once or twice a month, and Serena had been making the drive to Pembroke somewhat more frequently than was strictly necessary for professional collaboration. They were careful about it. They were deliberate. Neither of them was in a hurry. Both of them had learned the cost of moving faster than understanding could keep up with. But there was something there, something that had been built quietly. In the space between a knock on a door and a shared kitchen table. Between pasta and engineering reports and a girl who could tell when someone smiled differently than usual. Something that had the particular quality of things built with care. There's the kind built to last. One evening in April, Serena was sitting at Callum's kitchen table again, working on something of her own. Callum was making dinner. Petra was doing homework, allegedly. Spaghetti the rabbit was in his enclosure in the corner being existentially indifferent to everything. Can I ask you something? Callum said from the stove. Serena said, not looking up from her laptop. The first night you were here, he said. Before you knocked, how long were you sitting in the car? She looked up. She considered the question. 40 minutes, she said. 40 minutes, he repeated. I kept almost leaving, she said. I almost drove back to Columbus 4 separate times. What made you finally knock? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. I thought about what my father had written, she said. He's the only one who can help you, and I thought, if he was right about that, then what I was doing by sitting in the car was just making it harder than it needed to be. And then I thought, what is the actual worst case if I knock? He thinks I'm a stranger. He thinks the whole thing is strange. He doesn't help. I drive back to Columbus and figure out another way. And the best case? Callum asked. She looked at him. At the kitchen. At the drawing Petra had made that was now taped to the refrigerator. A horse, a rabbit, and 3 people of varying heights labeled in a child's handwriting. I'm looking at it, she said. Callum turned back to the stove. But he was smiling. There is something that structural engineers know that most people don't think about. The strength of a bridge is not tested by clear skies and empty lanes. It is tested by weight, by pressure, by the accumulated force of everything crossing over it. Day after day, season after season, storm after storm. The bridges that last, the ones that become landmarks, the ones that generations of people cross without thinking twice. Those bridges were designed with exactly that kind of weight in mind. They were built by people who asked not, can this hold today? But what will this need to bear over time? Warren Aldridge built an empire and lost his way inside it. But at the end, he tried to build something true. He pointed his daughter toward the one person he trusted to help her find her footing. That's not nothing. That's not everything either. But it was enough. Callum Reeves spent 4 years carrying something heavy in a bottom drawer. Not because he was waiting for his moment, but because he didn't know what else to do with the truth when the world wouldn't hold it. He found out. Petra Reeves, age 9, got a rabbit she named Spaghetti and continued to climb on every available surface and continued to be a very good judge of genuine. Some structures are built quietly, in kitchens, over cold coffee and old engineering reports, between a woman who learned to knock and a man who learned to open the door. They don't always announce themselves. They just hold. And that is where we leave Callum, Serena, and little Petra for now. If this story moved you, if it stayed with you for even a moment after the music stopped, please hit that like button. Leave us a comment below. Tell us what part of this story hit closest to home for you. Was it Callum's quiet perseverance? Serena's courage to knock on that door? Or Petra, who somehow knew from the beginning that something good was happening? Subscribe to Crest Stories if you haven't already, because we tell stories like this every day. Stories about ordinary people carrying extraordinary weight, and what happens when they finally set it down. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story about doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it's costly, even when you have to sit in a car for 40 minutes first. We'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves.